Hello everyone, Mark from Consequence here. I just wanted to make a tier list. I always do this, it's a meme. I'll probably put one out before the raid. But the date is 8/22, so this is one day before the expansion comes out. So anything that happens after this, I am not held accountable for. So the way I like to do this, I like to work from the bottom down. I'm actually going to change some of these. Let's go top tier. Decent. Raid buff. And we'll add one below. Bad. Alright, we'll go from here. So I'll work from the bottom down. I'll kind of explain my reasoning. There's no way I'm 100% accurate. The other thing to note is that this is catered for like top 100 world guilds, but not race to world first guilds. Um, so obviously they can do crazy things like stack a bunch of classes and stuff, and this is not like for that. So the bottom of the low tier, it's going to be balanced druids, and I know this is kind of known at this point. Um, they have no survivability. Their damage profile is bad. They don't AoE as well as they used to, and they do like really low damage. So they're really, really, really bad. Arguably in a tier in their own. I think like if I wanted to make this have more room, I'd even put them in a tier below this. But it's gonna share a tier with Devastation. Dev, I think Sim's like okay, um, but it just doesn't like bring a great damage profile. And there's a bunch of classes that can do better. They changed a lot with its CDs. It's just not nearly as good as it was. Um, but I think the difference between balance and dev is decently high. I think balance is that bad. So that's going to round out your bottom tier. Now, the bottom of the next tier, I'm actually going to put Feral. I am convinced you're going to see Feral Druids potentially even like race the world first guilds. And then you ask, oh, why would I put this here if it's in a race to world race to world first guilds? And the reason for that is because of the Druid buff. There's a lot of talk of like where your Druid buff's going to come from. Resto kept getting nerfed. Guardian will get there. It does a lot of single target damage. It's actually quite decent. But Guardian Druids haven't been used in quite a bit. Um, but if you're going to see a Druid spec, it's going to be this. It does okay single target, but it's not really good. Next here, I'm going to have Destro. Um, you could probably put Feral in front if you really want, but at least Destro brings like a niche of 2-target cleave. And there's a few encounters that have 2-target cleave here. So next here, we're going to have, where is it? I can't find it. Shadow Priest. I think Shadow Priest is decent-ish. If you have a really good Shadow Priest, you can for sure use it. I don't think in Sims. I don't think it does that well. It does bring PI. It's got its classic Shadow Priest problems in Raid. Um, you're most likely getting your Priest buff from a healer though, which reduces the usefulness of the spec by quite a lot. So next here, I'm gonna have Fire. It's definitely the weakest of the 3 mage specs. It's still completely playable. Um, it's just you're kind of at a point where you're just trolling, I think, if you're not playing Arcane right now. So Fire's still like really tanky and has a million defensives, but its damage is a little behind. Next, we got Outlaw. So with Outlaw, it sims pretty high if I recall. My personal issue with Outlaw is that it's got like a really bad damage profile for raid. You might see it for like a fight here and there, but it's just its profile is bad. It needs a lot of uptime, and it's a very classic sim bait spec where it like looks good in a sim, but then doesn't perform that well. And last year I got Ret. Again, if you got a really good Ret palette, you can just take it and it'll be completely fine. Um, Ret could be better than I think it is. Its damage is profile seems to be pretty decent. It still brings a bunch of utility. My issue with the Ret is there's only a certain amount of melee spots in a raid, and most likely you'll be dropping like a Ret Paladin for something else. But again, if you have a really good one, no issue at all. So this rounds out this tier. The first spec in the decent tier is going to be Frost DK. Probably a lot better in keys than in raid. I'm pretty sure its cleave is really, really good. But you could have like a fight or two where a DK DPS will swap the Frost and Holy depending on the situation. And it does do pretty good at just cleaving and doing very well. I think, as I said, it's really good in M+, I think. So next here, I'm going to put Prot Paladin, if I can find it. I've probably looked over it 10 times. So it's going to be probably the worst performing tank in terms of living. Now I see a world where if your Prot Paladin is an absolute god and can do all the utility Prot Paladin stuff, and on top of that live, then if Prot Paladin can live in raid, it's just the best tank. It just brings so much, but it's my understanding it's pretty weak and it can take a lot of damage, and I don't think it does too much damage, which is another factor. But again, it's completely fine if you bring this tank. Next here, Sub Rogue. I think in the right player's hands, Sub Rogue can be pretty decent. It's just it's really hard to play, and if Sin or even Outlaw is similar to Sub, then it's just easier to execute those classes. Next here I've got Serve, and I can even put Marks as well. So 2 of the 300 specs here. So you'll probably see Serve like appear in some fights. I thought about moving it up a little, but again, it just kind of goes into play with like how many melee can you realistically take. Granted, Serve can step out of melee quite easily, but it really just goes in like, if you're taking X amount of melee, you got to be careful. And Serve can do a bunch of cleave and single target at the same time. Again, you probably see it in the race, and some other guilds on certain bosses. And then we have Marks, very good at AoE, and okay at single target. I probably need some buffs, but really hard to do like both with Marks, so you really got to commit to one. But if you need a heavy AoE Hunter spec, Marks is your play. So next here, Demo. Demo is probably the second best Warlock spec right now. I don't think it sims like super high, very middle of the pack, but brings Warlock utility as well, so that that's going to put it in a decent spot. Next, I'm going to put Unholy, and I've been playing around with like maybe Unholy should be higher. I keep moving it around, but we'll get to this later. But DK tank is really, really good. So yes, AUG targets can be Unholy, and Unholy can do pretty well with that. But again, it's fighting for these melee spots. But you'll probably see a DK DPS pretty frequently in a lot of these guilds. And then lastly, there's BM Hunter. It used to be like one of the best specs in PT or in beta. Then they nerfed it a lot. BM really just can single target. That's it. Its cleave is really bad. So if you need people to single target the boss and hit their sim and do all the mechanics, BM Hunter is your guy. You'll probably, if any fight, there's a few fights that take some movement or pure single target that's right down BM Hunter's alley. But again, if there's like cleave and stuff, you need other classes to carry you. You're really just a single target person. So that's going to round up the decent tier. Next, at the bottom of the powerful tier, I'm going to put AF. There's a few fights where AF can really pop off on. And you could see like 2 of them on certain fights. It's most likely the best Warlock spec. But again, numbers wise, it's very middle of the pack. Next, we're going to have 2 healers. We're going to have a Resto Druid and a monk. So these are your buff fillers. They do high HPS, and they give you a monk buff or druid buff if you're not going to take it from elsewhere. They're completely fine healers to take. You have a really good druid or really good monk, go ahead, take it. There's really nothing wrong with any of the healers. And you can make basically anything work, but we'll talk about later like what I think is going to be like the core group, to like make the fights as easy as possible. So next here there is Venge. Again, just like a solid tank overall, not as good as the other tanks most likely, but you know, decently tanky. If you have a really good Venge, take it. It will feel like it's pretty strong in raid. Next here we're going to have Arms. So this warrior spec, it's going to do good execute. Rally's kind of weak these days, but it does bring rally. I think it's pretty squishy, which might be going, maybe if I think about it, it might go down a little, but it does pretty good damage. It brings execute. You'll most likely see it, at least on a few encounters. So next here, I have Assassination. It's been gaining some hype lately, so hopefully I'm right about this. But rogues were kind of down bad for a really long time, and Sin seems like it's going to be the play for most rogues on most fights. But again, you could see sub and outlaw depending on the fight. So next here, I'm gonna put Ellie, but this is kind of where things get weird. I actually forgot a spec, and I'm gonna go backwards in a second. But with Ellie, my understanding is that the sim, like the single target sim, is extremely high. I mean, we're talking like 1.5 something. The playstyle though is extremely degenerate. You're really just spamming lightning bolt a lot of the time, and you know, I think single target it will be really really good. But Ellie hasn't really been like a good class to take mechanics and stuff. So just on like a number standpoint, it's probably pretty decent. But if you need like a single targeter to take mechanics, you'll just take a BM hunter. So I'm gonna leave it here for now, just because of how high it sims. But it could just be like a worse BM hunter. So my mind might change on this. And the class I forgot was a Frost Mage. Hopefully I didn't forget anything else between Unholy and Teemo here. Frost does pretty good single target. Its damage profile is a little different than it was previous expansions. Um, but I think if it's a Frost tier, you'd probably only see like one Frost Mage instead of like multiple Frost Mages. So the next class I want to talk about has been slowly rising in like what I think is good for like a week now, which is Fury Warrior. If you need on-demand AoE, Fury Warrior is your spec. It does decent single target as well, but it is really strong at clicking AoE and just destroying stuff. In some of these raids, that is going to be a thing. So I've slowly been moving Fury Warrior up. We could find it even higher before the tier comes out. But you know, initially I had this probably at the bottom of this tier, at the top of this tier. So it's moved up quite a bit. So next I have Windwalker. Now I'm kind of thinking Fury should be higher than Windwalker, but we can just leave it. So Windwalker single target is very good, extremely good. Um, there is a world where you just take a Mistweaver or a Brewmaster and you don't need a Windwalker. That's completely fine. It will eat a melee spot, but a Windwalker who knows what they're doing and is extremely skilled will be probably one of the higher performers in your raid. It's also a target for PI, which I find hilarious because it's Windwalker, but um, pretty decent overall right now. So next, I got Holy Priest. Uh, Priest healers are kind of down bad in general, but Shadow's not doing so well. So you're gonna get your buff from a Priest, which is gonna push this up this list. Um, Symbols is heavily nerfed, so it's way worse. Holy will do pretty good AoE, but you'll see it when your Disc Priest is playing Holy, in my opinion. Um, or if you want two PIs, you can bring in a Holy Priest, which is always a thing. If you don't need the healing, you might as well bring more damage, right? So That's always going to push Priest higher than um, it may appear. Next tier, I'm going to put Brought Warrior. Extremely tanky, does it pretty well in single target. If you need a warrior buff, it's definitely a decent spot to grab it from. It's you're gonna see a decent amount of Brought Warriors. That's just a fact. They're very tanky and they can easily turn into the best tank. So next, I'm gonna put a healer that's gained a lot of hype the last week. I don't know if it's M plus focused, raid focused, or both, but it's gonna be Prez. I've always had Prez in this tier, but there's just been a lot of hype around the class the last few days. Does a lot of throughput. CDs are good, and it might just come in as an AoE healer that does a lot of healing, right? So Prez going higher and higher and higher. And last in this tier, I had DH. I had DH up here before. I moved it here. The playstyle is really degenerate from what I understand, and the sims on DH are always hard to hit. There's probably a DH player telling me that's not true, but um, so what you're gonna like, its sims really high, but it may have issues hitting those sims even with your top end players. So probably see one DH, maybe two. If you look at the last boss, two DHs might be a thing, but it's hard to speculate. And that's going to round out this tier. Next, I disagree with this personally, but I was told to put this here by people in my guild, but Enhanced Shaman. They were telling me it does a lot of single target, does really good cleave. Um, in my mind, it's just a class, a melee class. You can just sit and everything's fine. But I was told that it's like damage profile and how it plays is just really strong for raid, so I'm really just trusting what my guild's telling me with that. But before I had it like here somewhere, so still very good, but they're saying it's one of the better specs in the raid. So next I have Disc Priest. Priest again. Priest Healer's been a little down battle beta, but you're gonna take your Priest buff from Disc. There's a lot of good ramp opportunities in this raid for Disc, barrier opportunities well. Disc Priest is just always really hard to play. So if you don't have a Disc player that's really confident in their abilities or other healers to complement that player, it's just going to bring down the usefulness of Disc by a lot. So you really need to get Disc Priest to get the most out of it. And you need players that understand if the Disc is ramping, I don't need to heal. So kind of makes the class hard to play, but again, this is tailored to the higher end guilds. Next tier, I had Resto Shaman. This raid just seems to be like really good for Resto Shamans. I can see them being snubbed maybe at the very high end, but if you're outside like the top 5, Resto Shaman's crazy. You give people health, Link, um, Res Totem. It it's a class that can truly just hard carry raids secretly without you realizing it. If the player is good enough to pull it off. So very strong class, pretty hard to play in my opinion at the highest end, but the raid seems to cater them quite well. And next I'm going to have two tanks, completely reversible if you would like, but it's going to be Brew and Guardian. So Guardian single target sim to my knowledge is almost caught up to the DPS druids. So that's just something to keep in mind about the druid buff. Guardian hasn't been good in quite a while. It's, from my understanding, it's decently tanky. It's always had good mobility, and it's a pretty decent spot to get your buff from. And in fact, we are planning to get our buff from Guardian as of 8/22, one day before the expansion. Don't hold me accountable for anything. So the last tier, or the last spot in this tier, is going to be H-Pal. Really good spot healer. They nerfed it a bunch. It was dominating beta for a while. Aura Mastery is kind of terrible, but you'll probably get your Paladin buff here, and it does get spot healing, and you're always going to want a spot healer in the raid. So very, very strong choice. And that's going to round up the very powerful tier. Now, for the top tier, initially, I'm just going to put the classes in since it's obvious. It's going to be Aug number 3, Blood number 2, Mage number 1. and we can talk about them one at a time. So, AUG is a weird class because your guild skill level, the higher it is, the better that class gets. I can see a real reality where AUG falls off a cliff very, very quickly, even in like top 100 guilds, where it's really, really good and then really, really bad really fast. Um, or, it may require, your raid to be quite high eye level to get the most out of AUG. So it's kind of up in the air, like how good it is. But I'll tell you, from at least when we were testing it, it's quite good, especially when there's other classes like Arcane Mage is the buff. So one thing to note about AUG is you bring one, you bring two, most likely. So you'll be running two of them, and it is the biggest Giga Nerd spreadsheet class out there, except for maybe Sub Rogue. And you need to tell your players what to do, where to stand, where the CD, like you need to be involved in all that. So, and not to mention you have rescues and time spirals, which are extremely valuable in raid. So, again, probably really good at the high end, but the lower you go in rank, the quickly this class doesn't get as good. Next we have Blood. There is opportunities for ad management in this raid, to say the least. And Blood's tanky, and it does decent single target. So right now, it looks like Blood's looking like a lock in for everyone to tank. I've made this prediction before, and it ended up everyone like everyone played Blood, and then everyone swapped off Blood. I think that was Shadowlands. But yeah, it was looking really good in beta, even after nerfs. And then top tier, top is the top, is going to be your mage. I could probably throw this in a tier above if I really wanted to, but AUG again is just like kind of crazy if you can pull it off, and DK is probably a lock everywhere. So, I throw it at the top of here. And I don't see a world where Mage is going to stay at the state it is. Like, you could literally take 4 and be fine. Um, so we'll see what they do with the tuning, but as of this date, you're minimum taking 2, probably 3. You could even take 4. Like, it's kind of crazy. I think it sims like 1.7 last time I checked, and like the next class is like 1.5, so 1.55 maybe. So it's just completely ahead of everyone, and it's a mage. Block, defenses, range, mobility, you name it, it has it. Arcane is, and also Arcane's way easier to play now than it was before. So really, really good class, and that's all my classes. So probably make another video, but if you're looking to level something, this is for raid, not M plus. And that's all I got. So good luck leveling tomorrow. And I'll probably have live guides come up for the bosses, and then maybe I'll do another tier list right before the raid comes out if anything changes. They do tuning all the time, so we'll see. But other than that, I'm out. Peace.